Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 2.
Hello.
Hello. Hope you're well, whatever you're doing, wherever you are.
Blackfriars, Swansea.
Brixham.
Swansea West.
Baghdad. Running out of...
K2.
K2. They're all the places that we seem to have got the most listens, so thank you.
Thank you very much to the good people of...
K2.
K2, yeah.
All three of you. A quick look at the most popular films over the last decade or so would reveal two things. Firstly, the most obvious thing, the popularity of superhero films.
Yep.
Obviously. And secondly, the amount of prequels, threequels,
sequels, remakes,
reboots.
Yeah. Soft and hard.
Soft and hard. All of which alludes to one thing, the presence of nostalgia, or cultural nostalgia, as the term goes.
Yeah.
In this episode, we'll not only discuss our own relationship with nostalgia, but in a more broader context, specifically to film, and many examples, both good and bad, as well. So strap in and enjoy.
Questing the cinematic void.
So nostalgia, then, on a more personal level, is a tool in which we use to navigate the more difficult parts of our lives.
Okay.
When we're like in a period of struggle, psychological turmoil, boredom, we will retreat back to the memories of a part of our life that we have almost built up in our minds to be the best it's ever going to be. Yeah. This is typically in youth, which I think in a period in our lives as we are in our late 20s, early 30s. Yeah. And I think you speak to many people, many of our friends are in this age group, who would probably say they do the same in similar situations, because I think that your youthful past is still just about close enough to feel like you can sort of grab hold of it, for lack of a better term. Yeah.
You can kind of recognise yourself from your younger years without it being embarrassing, almost. It's. I
mean, there's plenty of fucking embarrassment.
Oh,
for
absolutely,
me.
yeah.
But
it's not 15-year-old embarrassment.
No, God, no, that's different.
More just. Being an idiot 21-year-old on the streets of Falmouth.
Yes.
As an example.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that it's a tool for you to reminisce, and that can be joyful, but also sometimes be quite painful as well, especially when you're not with friends, maybe perhaps when you're on your own. I sometimes find that I think about those memories in a slightly more negative way, just in the sense that I'm never really going to go back to that state. But they can also be very, very, very joyful as well.
I mean, I think that sort of the collective act of reminiscing is wonderful. I mean, when you're we've done it in a big group, and we'll just be
routinely
talking
do it.
Yeah. I mean, so much. It's almost like the foundation of a lot of our discussions, isn't it? I'm sure for many friend groups, it's sort of recounting tales of sort of youthful exuberance and silliness. But I think you're right. I think there is something in that, in the sense that it is a tool that definitely has potential for great joy, but also great sadness. Yeah. I think you can elevate those memories to the point that they almost become false. Yeah. In the sense that it's never going to get better than this, and that can have quite disastrous ramifications moving forward in life. If you're moving forward into a time of your life which is, not without challenge. I mean, it's
more responsibility.
More responsibilities. You have to have more boring conversations.
Yep. You're probably gonna become more boring.
Yeah,
whether you like it or not.
You're gonna find yourself talking about the best place to buy fair trade duck eggs or kitchen extensions, or having to deal with like an estate agent charging money for something that you don't quite understand.
Mortgages.
Why? Yeah, like all those things. And I just think in those times, that's when I find myself thinking, oh man, like I would love to be sort of just like 20 again, or 19, 20,
getting $1.5 grand from the government.
And just sort of like being able to like walk into someone else's flat and go, do you want to drink this bottle of £3 cider with me and just see what happens?
Oh yeah.
But, I think it's a sort of it's a tool not only for that, but it's also a tool for meaning, giving ourselves meaning in life. Yeah, meaning and a sense of purpose in how well we're doing, how well we think we're doing.
Yeah, you can kind of compare yourself to where, that's a classic phrase, isn't it? Where were you 5 years ago? Where do you want to be in 5 years? It's that's all ties to nostalgia.
And I think it also ties in sort of aspirations, because I think it's a key point that maybe we should sort of linger on just a touch more before we get into the nitty-gritty about films, because this is obviously a film podcast, and I was just talking about our miserable lives. It's this sort of point. I think there's a tipping point in your sort of teens, early 20s, into your sort of mid 20s to late 30s, where you sort of have to sort of start to think about what your aspirations are and maybe realigning them to fit in with the world and the people you've met and the things you want to do. And, in an extreme form, it's put down the guitar and get behind the desk. But in other ways, it's maybe just settling into things and actually finding joy in things you never expected.
Yeah.
Or being in a dead-end job and hating it.
Yeah.
Which is the negative side of that. But I think to sort of steer it away from being too negative, I think it is, I don't know, like I feel like it is this sort of, it's especially important for that in the sense that you are having to make those big decisions and get a sense of purpose from those decisions. We're very fortunate to at least have these things within reach, no matter how difficult they are at the moment. Technically, they still are within reach, just about. But they can be sources of great pressure, both internal and external, societal. A lot of the just things we have to do have been decided by people just as clueless as we are, but for some reason they've become the thing to do. And again, those things can provide great joy. Kids, house, marriage, but they can also be sources of great pressure. And I think we need to feel like collectively we're all doing the right thing, and that's where nostalgia can also be strangely deployed. And
it can also be deployed by film studios.
Yes,
nostalgia.
Or indeed by any creator of any medium. It seems to be, as we sort of alluded to in that intro, one of the most popular ways in which to sort of sell something to you.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's become a lot more prevalent in the last sort of 20 to 30 years, would you say? The use of it? Yeah,
I think it's definitely grown. I'm not sure about the sort of time frame of it, because I think it's quite difficult to quantify, but I think...
I'm only 28, so I don't know why I said 30 years. Who knows?
I think we are living in a sort of bizarre time where, there is just so much nostalgia. In films and in video games, in music... sort of almost trying to transport us back to a point in our life, a stage in our life, and the emotions and feelings that come with that.
And that's why it's such a powerful tool, I feel.
Yes, and a tool
that's why it works so well.
Exactly. I guess it's in that moment that this piece of culture that we've consumed wants to anchor us in, that period in your life where everything was great, and then see greater merit in the film or game or piece of music that we've listened to as a result.
Strange. It's almost like it's hijacking a point in a segment of your own mind and using it for the betterment of the product. You know what I mean? It's very clever, sort of, and it can be employed quite subtly as well, I find.
Yes, but there are so many examples where subtlety isn't really the name of the game. It is just in your face. Remember this? Remember this? Remember how good it was? Remember how good your life was then? It goes back to the thing we touched on earlier, in that in some ways nostalgia is the act of lying to yourself. And I think it can be reinforced by watching a film that is incredibly overt in its attempts to make you think about a period of a time in your past, or a version of yourself, with more reverence than perhaps it deserves.
It might not have been all that good, but you remember it like it's incredible. And it's odd. I do feel like it's tactile and unwarranted sometimes, I find.
We're going to unpack some good and bad examples of that shortly. But one thing I want to touch on quickly is an aspect of how cultural nostalgia can almost encourage you to sort of live a moment in history that you've never lived in before, almost like vicariously.
Yes.
If you think about, I know we're sort of moving away from film again a little bit, but if you think about Stranger Things, that has sort of ushered in, alongside other aspects of culture, a sort of obsession with the 80s. The 80s seems to periodically be the decade that people seem to be the most obsessed with, I'm sure for a lot of reasons, but it almost encourages you to sort of imagine your life in that era.
Even though the target audience, just most of them born in the 90s.
Right? And you have no connection to that era. You weren't born there. Obviously, you could learn about it, but you don't know what it was like to live in that area.
If anything, the knowledge you have of the 1980s, probably more often than not, all to do with the films that you've watched.
Yeah.
As opposed to the actual era. Like, because that's how you kind of would relive an era like that.
Yeah.
Just through media.
Culture almost creates a way that you interact with history, and this idea that you can sort of vicariously live this era, it almost encourages you to view periods in history through a certain lens, the camera lens. We talked about this earlier, but it's like when you think about the 80s, for example, you think about that sort of grain or neon lighting. You know, it's impossible to conceive the idea you're just looking at it through human eyes, the same eyes that take in your beautiful face right now.
Oh, well. No, I always think that, like, you know, if you were to imagine yourself in 1911, for example, you're going to think sepia toned, aren't you?
Yeah.
Just because of that. But in actuality, that period of history is going to be really colourful. Of course it is. It's going to be the same. Same thing, like colour-wise, is the same things you see now. And there's not going to be any grain or scratches on the film.
No.
Because it's not film. It would be with your own eyes. It is just, and that's just, I guess, how forms of media influence how you think about history and how you weirdly remember history.
Yeah.
Very
good.
Thank you.
Right, so let's think about a couple of film examples.
Oh, yeah.
There are many franchises at the moment that have been rebooted, or there are planned reboots, or sequeled or prequeled. I think a good place to start would be Alien. Alien franchise. I think that the whole sort of one of the great strengths of the original film, and to a lesser extent the sequel, which I obviously still love, but for different reasons, of course, is that the ambiguity is central to your emotional connection to the film.
Okay.
The ambiguity of why the alien is there.
Yeah.
The ambiguity as to how it was made.
Yeah. The company itself.
Really ambiguous. The mission, everything. Ambiguity is so central to the film's success.
Yeah.
In terms of how it generates tension, fear. You know, and I think that, and again, it sort of carries on. I mean, it does explain a little bit more in Aliens, but it's still quite vague. There isn't really a great deal of mythologizing there.
No, it's self-contained. Both those films are really self-contained. Like, I mean, literally in the first film, it's all set on one spaceship, and there's 8 of them.
Yeah,
is there 8? I think there's 8. And
we got the characters' age wrong in Aftersun, the girl's age.
Oh, she's not 9.
No, she's 11.
Fuck. Anyway, sorry about that.
We'll go with 8 though for Alien. Yeah,
there's 8,
fuck
8.
it.
Yeah, no, but I can, and that's it. It's just the concept is, you know, looking back on it, so basic, and I mean that with absolute, like, with compliments.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alien for me, and I guess this will tie into more about our discussion in terms of how we personally interact with these things. But Alien for me is like a big watershed moment in my life.
Yeah,
like in terms of horror.
First 18 I ever bought.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It seems to be like, you know, but yeah, it seems to be like that way for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But that was like a big cultural moment for me, and that can have ramifications in how I interact with later offerings, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, man.
But for me, it's like the biggest moment in sci-fi or horror for me in terms of like just the sense of atmosphere. And again, the atmosphere is reliant on that ambiguity.
Yeah. It's so weird that film was directed by Ridley Scott. Think about it. Like, his films are usually so high concept and so brazen. And again, I mean that in a kind of a positive way. You've got like Gladiator, you've got Blade Runner, like Exodus, Gods and Kings. Alien's really small. I love that. I love this kind of humble beginnings of this guy who ended up directing like big bombastic blockbusters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, sorry.
That's okay. No, that's an interesting point. No, that's a welcome one.
Love that film.
I mean, it's, you know, cool. It's up there with most people for a reason, right?
Yeah.
But now we look forward to the release of the films, in sort of more contemporary releases, should I say, of films from the Alien franchise. And I think this ties into a sort of wider cultural need that has been certainly massaged by the internet, which is the need to mythologize everything, the need to explain every detail. It's not enough now to have ambiguity in mainstream culture. Everything has to have an origin story. And there has to be a detailed account of why these things exist. Yeah. So Ridley Scott undertook that with Prometheus.
I was going to say, it's starting with Prometheus, isn't it? That was when that sort of resurgence came about.
Because even the sequels, sorry to interrupt, but even the sequels like Alien Cubed, as you call it, Alien 4, they're fairly self-contained stories. I mean, they sort of get a bit ridiculous in their own way, but they're not ridiculous in the sense that they want to sort of explain the origin story of the alien and what happened and how it ties into this wider sort of like grand narrative of creation.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, yeah, it was, say what we will about those 3 and 4, but they are still about the characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, Prometheus, oh God, it's all coming back to me now. It starts with like the creation of biological life, doesn't it? And you're like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Okay, is this? But I mean, they marketed it like not really as an alien film, didn't they?
No.
He said, I think Ridley Scott says, like the eagle-eyed viewer, will notice strands of like the Alien franchise. And I remember a reviewer saying like you're going to get slapped in the face with these strands. Bizarre, but it just introduces all of a sudden huge, almost kind of gladiator levels of scale unnecessarily, and like you say, and it mythologizes the origin of the alien.
And I think it's worth pointing out that as much as I don't like that in the sense that it sort of ultimately cheapens the sort of self-contained brilliance of the first film and the second film, I kind of admire it. I kind of admire this sort of lofty attempt to mythologize this sort of fake, this fake universe, and I've never said steadfastly that I hate Prometheus or dislike it in any way, but I do think that whilst it's largely pointless, I kind of can't help but admire it.
I actually remember being, impressed by the opening in the sense that it was like it looked really nice. I saw it in 3D, and was it in 3D?
Yeah.
It looked really cool, and I was like, oh God, this is huge. Like, imagine, maybe that is how life started, by like a big pale man with big eyes dropping.
I just remember thinking,
just dissolving like a barocca into a river.
I was like, what the fuck is going on? And that's what I kind of admired about it the whole time. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Like. And even like this sort of recurring motif of the female character, he's clearly bringing these, or the central female character.
Yeah, Noomi Rapace.
Yes. I actually thought was pretty good as the lead. I think maybe she could have been better served by a sort of stronger, more self-contained narrative. But I think, like the reoccurrence of sort of stylistic, visual and thematic motifs.
Yep. The chest busting happens again a little bit.
Set against the backdrop of that mythologizing.
I
don't know, it just sort of feels incongruent. It doesn't sort of make a great deal of sense.
Yeah. And it was very much it was like half a screenplay which existed on its own and was very self-contained, and half are like, oh hold on a minute. This is Alien. We've got to put pepper the Alien stuff in there. But because the other screenplay was so huge and grandiose, I guess. Is that a word? Grandiose?
Grandiose?
Grandiose. Shit. Because the script was so sort of grandiose that it almost forced the hand of the Alien franchise to be more mythologized. I don't know, maybe. That could be a potential reason why.
Oh, yeah.
Prometheus was such an odd movie.
It was odd. And then Alien Covenant after, which actually the first half an hour of I quite liked.
Yeah, I preferred it to Prometheus, actually. Overall, I thought it was more succinct. It was still batshit, like a lot of it. I don't remember a lot of it.
No, I just remember again thinking like, oh man, like, I don't know, there's this overwhelming sense of, does this film really need to exist throughout? Yeah. While sort of being slightly baffled by its existence, then somehow again sort of admiring it for just trying.
It was 2017, wasn't it? So superhero films were full swing by then, right? So they were probably thinking like,
maybe we can sort of catch on this sort of group of disenfranchised blockbuster film fans that want to see these things back on the big screen.
Provide them with loads of context, which previously they probably made their own mind up about. It was just strange, interesting.
Yes, another one then, staying with sci-fi, because sci-fi seems to be sort of well-mined territory in terms of the nostalgic element.
I mean, and it's especially in like the 1980s where that's like visual effects got a lot better. And so it's a lot of very visually striking sci-fi came out in the from 77 onwards, I guess, from Star Wars and then Blade Runner and then
Alien 79.
Yeah, even Dune, although the VFX in that weren't very good. Like, it was kind of a turning point.
I agree.
Sorry, your other sci-fi example,
RoboCop.
Oh, okay.
And we had the RoboCop
2016
sort of remake, I guess it would be.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a bizarre movie. It's sort of like, and what offended me so much about that remake was that it was a 12.
Oh man, yeah. I was thinking about this. I think potentially, I mean, the reason why they made it a 12 was to get more bums and seats. Obviously.
Yeah, they want to get the dad who loves RoboCop.
Bring his
I'm
son.
I'm saying this in stereotypical terms for impact.
Yeah,
but the dad who was obviously around then loves RoboCop.
Yeah,
to bring his son along.
Yeah. I didn't think about it that way at all.
And it felt like that kind of movie.
Yeah, and I mean, also back in the 80s, if you were like 12 years old, probably a lot easier to get into RoboCop than it would be now.
Yeah.
So they were thinking like, we need to get the same audience to watch the original, like the 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
But shit, we actually need to legally make it a 12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What struck me so much about that film is the lack of that sort of rebelliousness to it, and the original. I mean, again, the original was a real favourite of mine, both in the genre and just generally. But what I love so much about the original is that it's a critique of all these things, like American bombast and its obsession with violence and the sort of security state, the obsessive policing, and all these things. But Verhoeven has always been so brilliant about embedding his critique so deeply within the stylistic choices of that era. So you could watch that film, and I've watched it with people before, and they go, it's a bit odd and cheesy.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's like, and I sort of hate it when people say about 80s films. A minor bugbear is when people go, oh, 80s films are cheesy, and they think they've got it, they think they've figured it out. But like with Verhoeven, you're just doing him such a disservice, because like that's the whole point. This film is about American bombast and this sort of sense of like sort of superiority it has for itself, and it's through its sort of like military might and power and weapons and violence and strength. And he embeds those things into the film in a way that action films would have been like that way in the 80s. You know what I mean? So, and I think that's what makes the original, alongside so many other brilliant things, so fucking good. Is that Verhoeven knows that he has to fuse tone with execution.
Yeah,
and the fucking 2016 film is just none of that. It's a flat, sterile reimagining of this sort of like origin story. I mean, I have seen it, but my brain just sort of, and I was tempted to rewatch it for the sake of the podcast, but I just couldn't do it because it's just so disheartening to see a film like that exist on the basis that it wants to literally say to people, remember RoboCop?
Yeah.
Come and sit down in the cinema chair and relive it. It's shit.
Yeah.
You know?
Mate, what I was thinking about this earlier, imagine if they did that to An American Werewolf in London. How gutted would you be if they remade it and fucked that up? Like, they almost did as well. Max Landis was going to direct it. Stuff happened which kind of sort of pushed him aside, as it were.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I always just think that's such a treasure for me that like I would be so mortified if that were to ever be remade.
Yeah. Following on, for me, and then we'll dip into some more to other examples away from the sci-fi genre. Terminator.
Okay.
Another.
Yeah, film? I mean that's an interesting one because that never had that long a period where it wasn't at the cinema. Arguably, the longest gap was between 3 and 4. So Rise of the Machines and Salvation, I think. But it has a gradient of shitifying itself, doesn't it? Like,
oh my god! I mean, I remember we were at uni and we saw, was it Genesis? Terminator Genesis?
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of try and refrain from hyperbole in situations like this, but I was blown away by how shit that film was. I mean, it was, and I try and acknowledge good points because I just imagine like the crew just hearing someone say that, but like honestly, I mean that film, oh my lord! I mean the way, again, we talk about these reoccurring motifs in order to sort of placate that nostalgic desire that obviously is why the film is there in the first place, as in the remake or the sequel, whatever. And it brings them back, like bringing Terminator back and getting him to use his sort of quotes or subverting them in a sort of weird way and trying to humanise him more.
Strange, because it's trying to pull another T2, isn't it? Because that Terminator 2 did it so well when he became almost the father figure, and then presumably just trying to do the same thing again.
Yeah, Cameron picked his moments there, though, didn't he? Cameron picked his moments to like use Arnie's limited range to his advantage and to the character's advantage to develop the relationship with him and John Connor.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and it's also this thing that happens a lot in particularly sci-fi films, is that they try and take the key elements of the original films. Obviously, Terminator very much about technology, right? The fear of technology.
Yeah.
The reason why so many people are terrified of computers is Terminator, right? But then try and dump it crudely in the contemporary space by sort of making it about mobile phones.
Oh man,
there's that whole sort of like Siri critique thing that was just fucking weird.
And what they did to the Terminator himself was they kind of John McClaned him, didn't they?
Yeah,
it's sort of like he just became a sort of a husk of his former character,
just shitting out one-liners.
Exactly, just like what happened with like Die Hard as well. Arguably, that's another good, kind of interesting, not science fiction, but another interesting example of the nostalgia thing. Is like people, I think studios tend to over rely on the catchphrases because they think that's what people remember.
That sort of anchors them in the original. And the feelings of reverence they have for the original. Or indeed, if they were around during the time the original was released, that version of themselves that watched that film all those years ago.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny, I didn't consider Die Hard, but that's another. I mean, there's so fucking many.
Yeah, every day I think of more. I'm like, and that. I've got to mention that on the podcast. I can't because we'll be here for hours, but like, I think it's crazy.
Okay, I think we'll move away from sci-fi and focus on a particular studio then, shall we?
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Disney.
Oh, mate. Okay.
I mean, I know it's almost popular to shit on Disney now because they own absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And they own all of the franchises that have sort of contributed to this debate about the sort of, this what is happening to mainstream cinema and how is this impacting everyone else in that space.
Yeah.
And so I know for those reasons, obviously the fact they own Marvel, Star Wars, all the Fox properties, all that. I know it's sort of easy to say fuck those guys because it's easy to slag off a big conglomerate and
he's an easy target, aren't they?
Yeah, but I mean, what's even more galling to me, and I think you're going to sort of expand on this a little bit more, is that not only do they have all these heavy hitters in their arsenal, they also have just started remaking their own original properties in live action form.
Yeah, to almost exclusively detrimental effect.
Yeah. I don't care what anyone says. I don't like any of them.
No. I
mean, no one can argue with me here.
No,
because it's just me and you sat in a room.
I just think they're objectively worse. Like, okay, a good example, because I'm not a huge Disney fan in general, but one that really does stick with me is The Lion King. Like, I love that. That's a real childhood film for me, and I hold a lot of nostalgic feelings for that film. Like I've got it on Blu-ray. It cost me like 30 quid. As all Disney, all Disney Blu-rays always cost about 30 quid.
Oh my god!
But I bought it anyway because I'm like, I fucking love this film. It's worth it.
Oh wow, okay. I didn't know you had such reverence for it.
Oh man, yeah. I hate musicals as well, but I love The Lion King. It's strange.
Okay, that is the film that so many kids of our generation, or adults now of our generation, and Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I mean, but I think The Lion King resonates a lot more with like male audiences as well.
Do you think?
I feel like out of all of the Disney properties, it's I feel like that's more not just male, but like
the father-son element.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, it's a very sort of it's a bit of a boys' movie. So,
right. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah. The fucking remake came out, and I was weirdly excited. I was like, okay, well, let's give it a go. They're doing like Jon Favreau's behind the wheel. He's
steady pair of hands as far as blockbuster films are concerned.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, okay, this could be interesting, and it was just weird. It has to be a cartoon because it's about talking lines. You know what I mean? As soon as I started watching it, I was really gutted because I revisited it. The only reason I watched the new one was because I loved the original so much, and that's how it hooked me, man. Like, it was such in hindsight, it was such a sucker punch.
Yeah.
On that Disney kind of did.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know how you sort of feel about that.
I just think it speaks, and we sort of touched on the negative element of nostalgia and how it certainly on the cultural level it can lead to these just brainless cash-ins, and I think this is just the best example of it. Like, I remember thinking at the time, like, why?
Yeah.
I know that sounds a bit sort of like a bit vague, but I just think, you're just doing essentially the exact same film with a sort of kind of CGI that looks real for a bit until they start talking and it looks shit.
Yeah, it does, and it gets worse as well.
Yeah,
they still can't get. I talked about this in Avatar. They can't get fucking fire right. They just can't. They can't. You can't do CG fire, and there's a big bit at the end which takes place. Yeah, like largely inside a fire, and it looked worse than the cartoon. And like,
but why is it? Why? I mean, that film did pretty well, right? I mean, it grossed pretty well. I mean, I don't have the exact number to hand.
I think it was over $1 billion, though.
Right, well, so...
That's probably why.
yeah. So, obviously, the film spoke to a lot of people, and again, we talk about these films being like an anchor point. They bury deep in this part of your life.
Yeah.
And I think that's just all that film's purpose was to sort of like briefly sort of, pull you in to that part of yourself when you sort of, sat on the carpet with a bag of Haribo, watching it on VHS, you know what I mean?
Over and over again.
And for some reason, that having like being a really formative moment in your life and reliving it. But I think it's strange that, you can then watch it as an adult. I don't know, like when I think about like major moments like that in my life, like those sort of cultural moments that I can anchor to. For me, it was like Lost World, the real old Lost World.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because I was obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid, and I really loved stop-motion animation. I even preferred it to, like, the technological innovation of, like, Jurassic Park, which, of course, blew my fucking head off as a kid. Why wouldn't it? But, like, I love, like, Jason and the Argonauts. Any Ray Harryhausen stop-motion animation, I was just all over.
Yeah.
And I still have reverence for them on that basis. But I often think, like, what's the point of me sort of watching it and thinking like this? Like, am I trying to get back into the mind of my sort of 6-year-old, 7-year-old self? Like,
I
don't know, because I don't know. Like, I'm quite happy being an adult, really.
Yeah.
So why do I feel this need to sort of like think back to this sort of, even because we talked about this idea of nostalgia at this point in our lives being important as we come to this big crossroads. It typically comes in your late 20s, early 30s. But why, as a child?
Yeah.
Why do you want to go back to this point of like being a child? Like, I really find that
being like intellectually less complex.
Yeah.
It's really odd. I feel I don't know about you, but I quite often I have
intellectually less complex.
You know what I mean? Like, it's strange that you yearn for that. I guess ignorance is bliss. Yeah,
maybe.
Potentially, the reason is when you've maybe like had like not a bad day, but maybe you're just a bit tired or something. I think there's a tendency to want to revisit as opposed to explore.
Yeah,
and that might be why you reach for those films. And I think it is like a psychological phenomenon,
like a blanket, almost like a safety blanket.
Yeah, like
in the most extreme sense of the term, in the sense that I can like listen to an album I listened to in my teen years, and it will take me back to that sort of sweaty, wanky period of my life. Like for some reason, think, oh, that was kind of all right.
Yeah,
but like, it's even more comforting to go back to that point further in your life. Like we touched on with After Sun, we are very much sculpted by our childhood, and I guess the popularity of these films is testament to how important that phase of our life is, because we keep going back for more and more. A ceaseless barrage of Disney offerings sort of regurgitated and shat out. Aladdin, another.
Oh yeah, I mean Beauty and the Beast. That made over $1 billion.
Jungle Book.
Yeah, Jungle Book. That was quite warmly received.
That was probably the better one.
I think it just had a good cast, and
that was Favreau again, wasn't it?
Yeah. That's why they got him to do The Lion King. But what I think the reason why I think that the Jungle Book worked better than The Lion King was The Lion King's a lot more visually striking. And like, there's less characters in it, and it's a lot more, like you say, it's about a father and son, and it's a lot more personal. Whereas the Jungle Book is a bit more sprawling and a bit less tonally focused. And so you can remake it, and people will be like, "Oh, I remember this. I like this. That's charming."
Yeah,
maybe that's just the reason why it resonated with people. The remake resonated with people so much more.
Yeah, let's think about other films that touch into other aspects of nostalgia.
Yeah.
You wanted to mention
T2. Yeah, T2 Trainspotting.
Yeah, not Terminator 2.
Yeah. No.
We've talked about that enough.
So there's two films I want to talk about, and they both carry the same kind of themes. T2 Trainspotting, the sequel to 1996's Trainspotting, and The World's End as well, the Edgar Wright film. Mm-hmm. So first off, T2 is a sequel. and arguably it did use nostalgia to pull the kind of core audience from that first film back in. The actual story itself focuses a lot on kind of male behaviour through the ages and looking back at past experiences. That is actually kind of like literally a plot device in the film.
Okay.
So, for example, there's a line in it where they sort of revisit a lot of locations from the first film. And there's a great line in it where he just goes, "You're a tourist in your own youth." And it's just such a moment of where they kind of use the trope of the sequel, that is to repeat, be repetitive.
Yeah.
It's chock full of moments from the first film, but it feels sad. Yeah. And it's meant to feel sad to the point where, the Born Slippy track at the end.
Yeah.
They update it and it's so much slower and it's so much more plodding, and like you kind of realise that you're now inhabiting the brains of 46-year-olds.
Yeah.
And there's there's a great sort of quote from, I'm a big Danny Boyle fan, by the way. Like, just want to point that out there. Like, I'm a huge
I'm amazed it's taken to episode.
I know, yeah.
Second episode, but 3 overall for you to sort of confess that.
Yeah, so I'm
impressed.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, he just says in a lot of interviews concerning T2 Trainspotting, he just says the first film was about a bunch of young men who don't care about time, and the second film is a bunch of older men who have realised that time doesn't care about them.
Yeah.
And it just like kind of the film exists as a big kind of critique and both a critique and a celebration of nostalgia. So I thought it was just an interesting film to
I think that's a really great film to mention, in the sense that it has such a huge presence, the original, in... I mean, I guess for us, we were probably a bit too young to really appreciate it in the era of the sort of 90s.
Yeah, big time.
But for many people who were sort of, I guess, in their sort of teens, late teens, early 20s, in the 90s, it was a huge, huge cultural moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think it would speak to them quite a lot now.
Oh, totally.
And I guess it speaks to us as well, in that sense that we grew up with that film, in the sense there was a sort of a presence about that film. I remember sort of always being vaguely aware of it, even as a kid.
Yeah, it was mentioned a lot. And it was almost like it was mentioned like a video nasty.
Okay.
To me, anyway, I remember it being like a film that you shouldn't watch.
Yeah.
And then I found out because I loved Sunshine and Millions and stuff. And I was like, oh, I need to see Trainspotting then.
Yeah.
And I remember buying it on DVD. And again, going back to the idea of like my personal connection with Trainspotting, it wasn't in the 90s at all. It was probably in the mid to late 2000s that I first watched it. But it gave me a sense of the 90s.
And it's that vicarious sort of seeing through. You're seeing through that sort of grain.
Yeah.
That sort of film stock. You're seeing through the film stock into the 90s, and that is how you perceive the 90s.
Oh, completely.
I mean, I was born in 1990, so I have a sort of vague memory of snapshots of the 90s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of where the sort of ideas and feelings, this inexplicable feelings I have about that period of time, come from not just Trainspotting, but other films from that period.
Yeah,
and I think it's interesting that Boyle uses the idea of the sequel as a device to sort of, again, critique, as you said, and celebrate that. Yeah. Critique this idea of almost existing solely in the memories of your youth.
Yes.
But also celebrating the fact, I don't know, sort of celebrating aspects of it, celebrating aspects of...
Yeah. It's just...
But what elements do you think does the film celebrate?
Well, I mean, there's just great moments of Renton and Sick Boy kind of reconnecting.
Yeah.
And they kind of realised, like, man, we had a great time in our 20s. Right?
Yeah.
We had a fantastic... we shared a bond which went beyond drugs. We were actually really good friends.
Yeah.
But it kind of is peppered with those lovely moments of just like these men have grown apart and yet they still love each other.
Yeah.
But in a sense, it's sort of... the novel... Weirdly, the first novel exists as a kind of artifact in the sequel. In that,
right.
I don't know if you remember, but Spud, he starts writing the first Trainspotting.
Oh, it's a meta.
Big time. A lot of people didn't like that, but I thought it was quite interesting that the second film viewed the first as a not as fact, but as a story. These 4 young men want to relive.
I really like your point there about nostalgia being a tool for reconnection. So you reconnect with an older form of yourself, and then you realise not only that oh yeah, all right, I did really have a good time. I made some good decisions in terms of the company I kept.
Yeah.
Specifically about the company you kept, the people you meet, and how that can allow you to then actually solidify, strengthen, or reconnect.
Yeah.
In later life with people that maybe that you're, that you've sort of get drifted away.
Yeah, like you say, your life gets in the way. You get married, you have kids, you buy a house, and it's just a nice reminder. I think that second film that, like, don't worry, you can still
have, you don't have to be, it doesn't necessarily have to drown you.
No,
that stuff, because I can get so easily worked up by this sort of stuff drowning me for some reason. I don't know why, but I just feel like all this stuff is drowning you, but it doesn't have to be that way.
No.
And I think that's a really nice way of putting it through the lens of that film.
Yeah. I've
got a newfound appreciation for it.
Oh, cool! I'm glad, because it's it's the kind of film people watch once, and I feel like it really deserves a rewatch because it's all about just that nostalgia, effectively.
Yeah,
it's a really nice and largely positive comment on it. The World's End. Do you remember watching that?
I remember not being as keen on it overall.
This is what I want to talk about. So
I think that's sort of like a fairly...
Yeah, it's widely regarded as the weakest of the three, and I kind of agree. I think it is the weakest.
In terms of overall enjoyment and impact, definitely.
However...
Sorry, not to sort of shit on it before we start talking about it.
I feel like this is like a stupid theory of mine.
No, I want to hear
totally
it.
Wrong.
I'm if you've sort of given me more scope to appreciate T2, so I'm all ears.
So, Edgar Wright just made Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, right? He's on a high.
Yeah.
He's somehow, like skirted around the difficult second album thing. And he's got to do a third one because for some reason people were obsessed with trilogies. So people were pushing for this film, and I feel like him and Peg were a bit hesitant to write it.
Okay.
And so what I think they might have done is they wrote a film commenting on that feeling. And the idea that so if you haven't seen The World's End, the central character is kind of a man-child stuck in his own past.
So he's a victim of that excessive nostalgia. Being someone that is drunk on it.
Yeah, exactly. So he wants to relive a night out he had when he was 18, and he wants to kind of recapture that spirit. But the film is basically, I think, about Peg and Wright's struggles to reignite the fires of Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
In the because the whole thing is just about how it's fruitless.
You're never going to replicate that same feeling again for anybody.
So in them saying that, I feel like, is it a bad film, or is it just a slightly... I mean, it's not a bad film, but like, is it the weakest of the three, or is it actually the most weirdly clever? I don't know.
Right, okay.
I might be reading too much into it. It's definitely the least funny, and the first two are absolutely hilarious and really quotable. The third one isn't, but... It's just, I do feel like it's also the most tragic and the most heartfelt at the same time. It's
definitely the saddest one, isn't it? And it's the saddest chiefly through Peg's character and his desire. I mean, no, I see that, and I like the idea of talking about the nature of the sequel as this sort of desire to get audiences to feel the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
I remember going back to Aliens, actually.
Oh, go on.
Cameron, I'm sort of paraphrasing his quote because I can't remember it, but he said that like there was absolutely no point remaking Alien again. There's just no point because you're never going to get there. You're never going to do that again.
Yeah.
Because as soon as someone makes something like that, you're just never going to do that again because of the circumstances around the film's construction, the era, the people involved, etc., etc. There's so many reasons why you just can't replicate the same thing again.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, but I can do this. I can do." I think in his words, like white knuckle action. Okay. Which at that point, 100% agree, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, and I think that ethos or that idea in the sort of context of nostalgia works quite well because it's almost like saying, no. You know, like, obviously I will anchor things with some similarities. Obviously it's still got aliens in it. Yeah. But, you know what I mean? This idea that actually you can take a little bit of that formula and position it in something else. As long as it's competently constructed and made, it can have its own legacy.
Yeah.
Same with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Oh my god, right? I fucking love that.
Yeah, man. Like sequel. Texas Chainsaw Massacre for me is one of my absolute favourite all-time films. I love it. I talk about Alien being this watershed moment for me in terms of horror and sci-fi. It's pipped for me by Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I just love it. I think it's a fucking
it's a
special film.
It's a near masterpiece.
Yeah, I think so. And again, there are so many things about the film that make it the way it is. The budgetary constraints.
Yep.
For example, arguably
the creativity that was born from that.
Exactly, and you can't replicate that
no.
at all. It's a film of its time. Like the horror filmmakers like Tobe Hooper and Wes Craven are going out into the dirtiest, most fucking arid parts of America and dragging these stories through the dirt and the blood. And they're sort of make just terrifying audiences and shocking conservative individuals, and there's no way you can replicate that. And then Tobe Hooper goes, well, actually, I'm going to make another film, but I'm going to make it this wacky, sort of still vaguely horrifying, but sort of funny film.
That sequel is made of rubber, I swear to God.
Yeah.
Like, you can see the sets. Everything's lit with like orange, red and blue. It looks like a kind of fairground ride, but I love that. And you're right. He is basically saying, you know what? I'm not going to make the first one again because I can't, because you're giving me too much money. I'm going to make this instead. Effectively, it's a comedy, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's horror. It's gruesome and horrifying, but no, not in the same way the first one.
No, it's not as impactful.
Oh, nice! I didn't think about. I forgot about that.
Yeah, and does that? I mean, this is a bit of a tenuous link between those films and this, but I guess it speaks more to the earlier films that we've discussed. Does that say something broader about nostalgia in general? Like, enjoy it, but don't think that it's ever you're gonna replicate that.
No, you never are. If anything, I mean, you'll have much more success going into the future with a more of an open mind, maybe like Edgar Wright tried to do with The World's End. He's just like, you know what, I'm just going to make this instead. I'm going to say I can't make Hot Fuzz again. That's what I'm going to say with my third film. Or like Tobe Hooper saying, like, you know what, I'm going to make what I want to make instead, and I'm going to progress. I'm not going to regress. I think that it does speak to the pitfalls of nostalgia. I feel, and maybe those particular filmmakers' aversion to it. Because, I mean, Edgar Wright made Last Night in Soho as well, which is all about how the past isn't necessarily as glitzy and glamorous as you might remember. I forgot about that, actually.
We do have this sort of tendency for sort of collective revision. We have this collective revisionism of our history, don't we? I think. Yeah. And we seem to think, you hear that sort of classic thing. I mean, I've never really heard it said to me directly for a very, very long time. And I'm struggling to think if I've ever actually heard it said to me, but not like the old days.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a phrase you hear quite a lot. And that sort of historical reverence for periods of history that obviously were rife with their own issues and problems and difficulties. And yet, that reverence for it is almost... Is it born out of a fear of what's ahead of you more than anything else, just to say it wasn't like the old days?
Yeah. Exactly. That's interesting. And a lot of filmmakers do sort of either really push for that, hey, remember the old days, or push against it.
Let's think about maybe away from mainstream cinema.
Okay.
And think about sort of more... Well, not, sort of the term mainstream just sort of makes you feel a bit nauseated because we're like, there are plenty of filmmakers that use nostalgia as a device, as arguably a stronger thematic device. Paul Thomas Anderson, for example. Licorice Pizza.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's his most recent film.
Yeah.
A film steeped in the time with which it was made.
Yeah. It was 1970s,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, he uses sort of the film... I think he uses like the film stock from the era. I'm fairly sure I might be wrong in that assumption.
And every single one of his films is also, as an aside, in the San Fernando Valley.
Yes.
Basically, every single film. Yeah. So he's clearly someone that's driven hugely by nostalgia in his movies.
Yeah, and I think maybe his use of nostalgia is a lot more personal than, say, like Danny Boyle or Edgar Wright, or even like, the Disney fires. Is he uses it as not as a tool to say to his audience, hey, remember a time. It's like he's using it as a means to express his own affection for his own past. I feel like that's definitely the difference.
It's less of a marketing tool for him. You know what I mean? Obviously, people in the marketing department of his film will probably use that as a selling point, but for him at the start, or from the inception of the film, it's not about necessarily, getting people to come and enjoy a slice of the 70s. It's chiefly about the story first that happens to be set in the 70s, in the case of Licorice Pizza.
Yeah, and he'll even... Licorice Pizza sort of interweaves prominent moments from that era into the plot as well, quite successfully, like the gas shortage. Quite a big thing, but it doesn't feel like a grab, a kind of mind grab. It feels like
they're almost ignored because the film's about that sort of youthful, exuberance, to use that phrase again for some reason.
Yeah, no.
But it's about how kids they're getting on with it, and all this stuff's going on in the background. It's almost like background noise. All of the sort of tumultuous issues and the sort of social struggles and all of these things are going on in the background. I think it's really well done in the sense that it works well to the themes of the movie, in the sense that, as kids, you are sort of a little bit more aloof. You can apply this sort of dreamlike
you just kind of
idea to it.
Bumping into moments and not even really entangling yourselves.
No, yeah. But in the background, there's this very sort of present historical... I guess there's a sense of seriousness in that background, which is acknowledged again in aspects of the narrative as well, but chiefly in the sort of background noise of the sort of like TV reports and the news reports.
Yeah. Oh man, Paul Thomas Anderson. A lot of his films are period pieces, aren't they?
Yeah.
Phantom Thread, There Will Be Blood. They're all nearly all set in the past. Not even necessarily moments from his own past. Like There Will Be Blood is a lot more kind of a bit more of a history lesson in that it was, when was that, like 18th
it's the
century?
The
oil boom,
the sort of taming of the Wild West and all that sort of
but he manages to keep it quite human. I mean, nobody alive today is going to necessarily remember that era anyway.
Another thing I just want to quickly touch on is how memories in these sorts of... We sort of touched on Paul Thomas Anderson. I want to sort of just quickly before the end lean into Terrence Malick a little bit.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because I fucking love Tree of Life.
Okay.
I love that movie. One of the reasons I love it so much is its use of the camera as a way of showcasing the fractious nature in which, as adults, we remember our memories.
Okay.
And the nostalgia that is attached to those memories.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if you remember the scenes of the camera sort of like, almost like following this sort of characters as children, like almost like a puppy or a dog.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just sort of crawling through the grass. And it all feels so fractured and so quick.
Yeah.
And the way Malick cuts to like so these sort of formative moments of like the first bit of discipline, the softness of the mother offset by the hardness, the tough love of the father.
Yeah.
And all these things and how they link to this sort of like these wanderings, these existential wanderings of the adult. You know what I mean? I don't know. I wonder what you thought about that, because it's like when I think about a film that interrogates memory and the power that memory holds in sort of how you move forward. I don't know. I just, in terms of like certainly a Western or sort of more American or English language example, I can't really think of a film personally for me that does it better.
Yeah, then kind of presents memory as a tool for
as a mess,
as a means to go on. Yeah, and also as a fractured, horrendous, imperfect mess. I mean, like, that film is very it's very Malick, isn't it? Like,
I mean, there's dinosaurs in it at one point.
Yes, there's also a big sort of 20-minute section about the origin of like time,
which he interweaves into this sort of tale of nostalgia. I mean, only Malick, man.
Oh, I know, but he kind of pulls it off. I know. I need to revisit that film. Actually.
I 100% think so. But if you're trying to think of a Friday night film, about the nature of memory and how that sculpts who we are, that's a pretty fucking good place to start.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably one of his strongest films, actually.
Yeah,
in general, his filmmaking style is quite. I don't know what the right word is to describe it, but it
eclectic.
It is quite like floaty, I guess, and fractured,
but never in a way that isn't sort of like completely impactful.
So what a topic for him to tackle.
Yeah,
that's probably why that film is kind of exists as one of his best.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So there we go. It's been a far-reaching discussion.
Sure has.
From our own personal relationship with nostalgia to Alien to Malick to Lion King to Edgar Wright.
Oh God,
we don't do things by halves here.
No, mate.
That's for sure.
We Ridley Scott came up a lot in that one.
Oh yeah. Good old Ridders.
Oh, Ridley.
But yeah.
Well, That's been good fun.
Let's cut it here.
Let's cut it right here.
Yeah.
Listen back, and hopefully it won't sound all echoey. Shit.
Questing the cinematic void.
So there we have it then. More unfocused rambling
About movies.
completed.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you for making it to the end.
Yeah. What are we going to discuss next?
So, I'm glad you asked. We are going to be discussing Mark Jenkins' follow-up to the brilliant bait, Ennie's Men.
Yes.
It's a film that we have had on our radar for a while, as I'm sure many people have.
Yeah, really striking trailer.
Yes.
Really interesting.
Yeah. I try and avoid trailers just for the simple fact that, I don't know, like, I not just for the sake of, like, ruining any aspect of narrative, but just I want to be able to immerse myself in it.
Okay, yeah.
So, but I did catch a little bit of it, and it was pretty striking, as you'd expect.
It doesn't give anything away at all.
No.
It's just a series of kind of really striking, very grainy looking images.
Yes.
It's first film shot in colour.
Okay. Yeah. Of course, yes. Because
So,
Bait was
yeah,
black and white, wasn't
really
it?
excited to see that, actually. I love films set on islands. Don't know why. Like The Lighthouse, and even there's a film called The Retreat with like Cillian Murphy in it. I don't know why. There's something about an island with a little lighthouse on it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned The Lighthouse, because I think this film will lend to a broader discussion about the resurgent popularity of the folk horror.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
And how that ties into the release of Ennie's Men and the growing popularity of Ennie's Men. At this moment, I think it looks to be outperforming Avatar 2 in Cornwall, which is a lovely bit of news.
Is that right?
I think so. I remember reading that. I'm not sure how right that is.
Oh no, I'm gonna look that up. So apparently there was a night that everyone went to see Ennie's Men as opposed to Avatar and the Whitney Houston film for that evening. Anyway, well done, Mark Jenkins.
So yes, we'll look forward to discussing that next week. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you next one.
Cheers.
Care.
Bye.
Bye.